Now, here's a question. Have you been relaxing with friends and family at the weekend, for instance, and then suddenly received an urgent email from work? What then your reaction? Do you feel phlegmatic and understanding that work sometimes means all hands on deck? Or do you feel sick to the stomach that work can't be left at the door? In France, the right to disconnect is about to become a legal right. Companies with more than 50 staff who flout it will be prosecuted. Should it be illegal to contact employees when they are out of the office? The Managing Director of Personal Career Management is Corinne Mills. Corinne, welcome to you. Jenny Garrett is an executive career coach and a working mum. Jenny, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Well, where do we go with this? Corinne, kick this off if you would. Prosecutions for contacting staff at weekends and in the evenings? How's that going to work?
Is it really going to happen? I don't think it's enforceable. I do think, look, there's something to this, the right to kind of disconnect. I do think that's a valuable thing that everybody needs time to turn off. But actually making legislation, and I'm not quite sure that there are going to be prosecutions. You know, perhaps having a charter of best practice for organisations. Look, people can always ignore emails, even if they're coming in.
Can they? Jenny, can they ignore emails? How do bosses take to staff ignoring emails that are really urgent?
I think it's very, very difficult to ignore emails. I think you have to be seen to be responsive. If you're working for a global organisation, there's all of the times. Yeah, I think it's very, very hard not to. I think, you know, previously it was work 9 to 5, and if you left at 5, you were a clock watcher. I think if you don't respond to emails, you're a bit of that same sort of person, so that you're not willing to go out of your way. What is it just to respond to an email? I think if you're not in control of your life, it's very, very difficult. I welcome the legislation, actually. I think it can make a big difference to people's lives. And, you know, in the very same way we've had to think about targets for quotas for women on boards, etc. If we don't measure it, it doesn't get done. And I think we need to actually put some things in place to really make sure that we don't all get burnt out and extremely stressed.
Corinne, I was racking my brains this morning. I was trying to remember which top executive it was. I think it was Jerry Robinson, who was a sort of swashbuckling, buccaneering businessman in the 80s and 90s, probably still around, who used to say, if you can't do your job between 9 and 5, then you're not doing it properly. Your time management's askew.
Well, I think, you know, we live in a, as kind of Jenny said, we live in a global kind of world now.
Different time zones, emails pinging.
Different time zones. What are you going to do? You know, people that you might be working with in China or the States or whatever, you know, their working day is a different time period than your working day. What, they're going to stop sending you emails just because you're off? It's not going to work. I do think there is something about good practice with organisations. And I do think in the kind of French legislation, they were talking about getting a code of good practice about email etiquette. And I think as a general principle, most things will wait till the morning, you know. So I think there's that. But I also think there's a self-management piece here as well, which is you don't have to open your email.
Let's come on to that in a second. I mean, just you draw an important distinction, Jenny, that point between, you know, somebody looking at an email that's there for sort of information purposes and the one that requires an instant reaction and a decision, and you've got to rack your brains, think it through, and it could be something on which your, you know, fortunes hinge. There's a big difference there.
Yes, but I'd say if it was that urgent, call me. You don't have to send me an email, because the chance is I could miss an email, couldn't I? And so I think if we're, you know, email is a tool. We're supposed to use it to help us. We're not supposed to be a slave to email. And if we're looking at every email just in case it's going to be that crucial email, then that means it's taking up all of our time, our energy, and causing us a great deal of stress.
Corinne, the technology is working against people in a sense, isn't it? Because it's all pervasive now. I mean, the time was not that long ago when you could say to the boss on Monday morning, I didn't get the email on Sunday afternoon because I was in the Lake District or whatever. Yeah. I was on a plane. It doesn't wash anymore. They can get to you wherever you are.
It doesn't, but there are advantages, aren't there? I mean, I know, you know, for instance, if we're talking about women, there are lots of women who do the school pickup and then will go home and then they will work in the evening and they might well be sending it. So it kind of works both ways. But again, I do think it comes back to a little bit of this self-management piece as well. It's not, you know, sometimes you will get a boss who oversteps the mark. They might be sending in emails all the time. There's probably lots of other things they're doing that are boundary crossing as well. So I think sometimes you have to kind of not respond to it. You know, if somebody keeps sending you things that don't matter or you're CC'd in and it's not really important to you, then don't respond, or have a conversation outside and say, look, do I really need to be CC'd in this? I'm going away for the weekend, I'm not going to be able to respond to anything.
I think culturally in the UK, it's much more difficult to do. I think in France, there's a real family culture. There's a sense of, you know, the evenings are for us, the weekends are for us, let's have these long lunches.
Is that why the economy's gone down the toilet?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the economy, but I think...
It's not a comment, it's a fact, isn't it? I mean, the French economy is in a pretty parlous state.
Yeah, but it's a different culture, and I think it's harder for us to do in the UK. I think it's harder for us to do than it is for those people.
Jenny, what about Corinne's point that it actually some personal responsibility applies here? If we examine our consciences, and I'm even, you know, dare I say it, even thinking of my own behaviour here, that we have the phone, we sometimes find the fingers creeping towards it to tap. You know, we don't need to. What on earth are we doing?
Yeah, I think it's really hard because phones are part of our lives. My phone is my alarm clock. It sleeps beside my bed, and therefore, if I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to check the time and something pings up, I might actually look at that email. So I agree, there is some self-management involved, but I run my own business. I have more control. Yet, if I'm at the whim of my boss who says, don't look at your emails after 6, but is sending them all, I might feel an obligation to check. And I think it's a different thing when you're employed.
Corinne, doesn't it? Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, you know, managers do need to have a model of best practice because it's all very well, as you say, saying, all right, don't, you know, nobody email after 6, but actually if your manager is still sending things over, then you kind of feel that pressure. So I do think they need to be a model of good practice in that, yes.
There's a key point here which we haven't talked about, which is it depends on the type of entity we're talking about, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you're, the companies that the French are talking about, in excess of 50 employees, that suggests a certain sort of management critical mass. If you are working for yourself, then it's a different game altogether, isn't it? You might not, if you don't answer that email, that might be a vital bit of business that goes somewhere else.
Yeah, and there are always emails. My gosh, we are so glad we got the night before. You know, something about you need information because the meeting that you thought you were going to have in the morning, suddenly there's a piece of information you need to know in advance. So actually, you know, sometimes there are necessity for all of those things as well.
I agree, but I think we're being sold a dream that doesn't exist. This blended life of work is life and life is work, and it all combines. It doesn't. I don't think it really works. I mean, I've sometimes sold it to myself and then had 3 weeks holiday where I've not responded to emails and realised what I was missing.
And you felt better?
Yeah, I felt so much better. You know, so re-energised, so much more creative, my performance increases. So, you know, until we do it, maybe we don't know. Until we do switch on.
There are really, I mean, you introduce a bigger topic there, but I mean, you know, Corinne, this idea that work is fun. You know, work's got to be fun. Let's have some table tennis tables outside for the kids to play on. You know, it's the Google mentality, isn't it? Work isn't the place you come to work, it's a place you come to make friends and have fun.
And hopefully do something productive as well. Well, look, it is much more seamless. We are very connected. And I think the kind of boundary is when does it feel exploitative? Because I think there are lots of things that do work.
Who decides when it's exploitative? HR?
Well, I think as an individual, you have pretty much a good sense. If you're feeling resentful that you're getting those emails or those calls, then that resentment is telling you something, that the boundary is skew-if. I don't think it's necessary, and that can be regardless of whatever code of best practice. So I think, again, for me, it does come down to a little bit about the individual, having a good sensor on this, being assertive on this as well.
But not everybody's assertive.
No,
some people are living in fear of losing their job.
Well, that's true, but you know what? I know things are difficult, but there are always choices. And if you are in an organisation that is exploitative, and you know, or in a profession, and let's face it, there are some professions. If you work in management consultancy, you work in law, you're doing business deals.
You know, work comes in pulses, doesn't it? There are busy periods or slack periods.
You do. That's what's expected. And if that's no longer right for you, or you don't want to do that anymore, then think about your options.
Jenny, I'll just give you the last word. I mean, is this something that the broad trend feels like, where the expectation is that staff will be on call a bit more than once they were? Does that trend carry on, or does it stop?
I think we're going to have to review things. Corinne is a coach, and so am I. And I think one of the things we know is that people come to us when it's too late. They're not self-aware during it. It's when they burn out and when they're stressed out that they come to us. There's going to be more and more of that. And ultimately, that's going to have a real terrible impact on the UK economy. So I think we need to look to France, see what they're doing, and think of what we can do for ourselves.
Jenny Garrett, Corinne Mills. It should be a regular slot. This really enjoyed that. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.